Hello, my name is Emphrey, and this is an AppGameKit Game Development tutorial. Now in this tutorial, we're going to create an enemy, and we're going to create a system in which you can defeat that enemy. You'll be able to defeat the enemy by shooting the enemy with one of the bullets that we made in the previous tutorial. Right now we're in paint.net, and I've already created my enemy. Now to make the enemy character, all I did was just take the player character and I cut off the body and just redrew the body on. And then what I did was I used this selection tool here, highlighted it, copied it, opened a new file, went to new. Whenever you copy a file in paint.net, the size of the file will already be registered in the new location, so you don't have to do anything to this. And then I clicked OK and then pasted that, and then took the selection tool, chopped off the legs, and then drew on some new legs to give it the appearance of making a step towards walking. So that's what I did. I don't need this, but that's what I did to create the enemy. So I did those steps until it looked like this and this. And then all I did was just save it. I've already saved it. You could go File, Save As. I saved it as Enemy 1. Click Save. You can do that. I did the same thing here. File, Save As. I named it Enemy Walk 2 right here, and you just click Save there. Again, I already did that. You can do that. So that's how I created my enemy. But your enemy character can be anything you want, as long as the frames kind of match up a little bit and are the same size. And the other thing that I want to draw attention to is the road. Well, in previous tutorial, I just thought it looked better with this red color palette instead of the weird looking roadway with sideways marker lines and stuff. So with the road, I'm just reverting back to the old road that we have. You don't have to change your code or anything. I just redrew it because road looks a little better. Our floor just is going to look different the next time we launch our game. And I already saved that. So now we're going to go to code. Okay, so now we're in our code. And before I start, remember our code has not changed from the last tutorial, but I just kind of reorganized things a little bit. I made sure everything's in order. We create our background first, we create the player, and we create the floor, and we create the enemy. So that's the order that I put everything. Same thing with down here. The background, anything dealing with the player is going to be right here, directly below the background. Here's our player's animation. Remember, we gave the player a ID of 2, so everything dealing with the players right here. The player's bullets, because the bullets involve the player, I put them with the player stuff. So, and right now we're dealing with the enemy, so anything dealing with the enemy, I put that together. And same thing with the floor. Here we have our background section, and below that we have our player section, just like above. Now this part focuses on the movement stuff. Remember the jump has to do with movement too, so I put that below the movement. And the bullet deals with the player too, so I put the bullet with the player stuff too. Even the stuff dealing with shooting the enemy, I put that with the bullet too, because that has to do with the bullet. And so this is how I organize my code. Then we got the floor, just like above. And now we got the enemy stuff here too. Let me go ahead and explain this code. The enemy code is not really that much code. And another thing, whenever you create your sprites, especially with this create sprite command here, the order in which you create your sprites is the order in which the computer will draw them. For example, remember, see, we got 1 here. 1 represents the background, 2 represents the player. And that's the way we got it written here. So therefore, the background will be behind the player. But if you take this and put the player behind the background, whenever we launch our game, you won't be able to see the player because the computer is going to draw the player first and then draw the background right over the player. So the order in which you create your sprites is important to bear in mind. Okay, so back to talking about the enemy. First thing I did was I gave the enemy an ID of 15. Next, we took these enemy pictures or PNG files and we attached them to this enemy's ID here. So here we have the enemy's coordinates. Remember, X has to do with going right and left in the horizontal position of the enemy, and Y has to do with going up and down in the vertical position of the enemy. So this X means that on the horizontal front, the enemy is going to be on the 100th mark. And this Y says that the enemy is going to be down below on the 300th mark on the vertical front. And then we made a system to tell whether our enemy is facing towards the right or facing towards the left. And these are the directions that the enemy will go in depending on which way the enemy is facing. And next we have the enemy walking. We use the enemy's ID of 15 that we gave him up here and here. And we put that here. And 5 has to do with the speed. This third number, 1, has to do with whether the frame is going to be looping. And yes, the enemy's walking animation is going to be looping. Last 2 numbers has to do with the starting frame and the ending frame. This will be the starting frame. This will be the ending frame. And it's just going to go back and forth like this in appearance of walking. Okay, so that's what that does. And the way I set up my system to defeat the enemy is I like to recycle my enemies because recycling is more efficient for the computer, it's easier, and it makes the game run more fluidly. Computer can manage memory better, especially if you have a lot of enemies. So I use this recycling method. Okay, so this has to do with when we shoot our enemy with the rightward bullet. And this says if any of the rightward bullets collide with the enemy, remember we gave the enemy an ID of 15. So if any of these rightward bullets collide with the enemy when the bullet is active, then that bullet will become inactive and disappear as it hit the enemy. And that bullet will become invisible because 0 means invisible. Remember we gave our bullet an ID of 3. We did that here in the previous tutorial, remember? So that bullet will become invisible, and the rightward bullet will send the enemy to the 1,000 pixels away, which will be off screen, and that will be in the rightward direction. And okay, so that's the rightward bullet, and then we had the same thing going on with the leftward bullet. Remember, we gave the leftward bullet an ID of 7. Remember? Seven. Right here. So this says if any of the leftward bullet hit the enemy when that bullet is active, that bullet thus then becomes inactive, and that bullet disappears as if the bullet hit the enemy. And if it hit with the leftward bullet, then that will send the enemy minus 700 to a leftward position off screen, going in a negative direction. I mean, the enemy's going to disappear. It'll get an effect as you're defeating the enemy, like it should. Okay, so that's how you defeat the enemy with the leftward bullet. And here we're just finalizing the enemy's position. Here we're taking the enemy's ID that we gave it above. See, we're taking this enemy's ID, and taking coordinates, and putting it all here to finalize where our enemy will be on screen once we launch our game. So that's what this does. And here, this says if the enemy is behind Emphrey, then it will go towards the rightward direction and face the rightward direction. Likewise, if the enemy is in front of Emphrey, it will face towards the leftward direction and go towards the leftward direction towards Emphrey. And that's our code. So let's go ahead and launch our game and see what this looks like. Okay, here's our game. And as you can see, our floor is back to the original red color. And you can still jump on it and everything too, as you saw the player landed on the floor. Okay, so let's see what happens when we shoot our player. I'm going to start with the rightward bullet. Okay, so that worked. And I'm just going to see if all our bullets work. So I'm going to shoot him with the... Okay, so we shot the enemy with the third bullet, and it disappeared. So that means all our bullets are working with the rightward direction. Okay, so let's see what happens when we shoot our enemy with the leftward bullet. Okay, so... Alright, so that worked too. And then... See it come back. And do you see how the enemy keeps recycling? See, you can create a whole bunch of enemies like this and keep having them recycle back. I mean, we just have one enemy, but you can have a whole bunch of enemies. You keep shooting and they just keep recycling off screen. This way it gives the player the illusion that they're beating the enemy when it's really the enemy who just keeps coming back over and over and over again. And this way is also less code too. All you're doing is just changing the enemy's coordinates every time it gets shot. So you can make your whole game like this. And recycling helps the game run more fluidly, as you can see. Less code and things for the computer to process can be very helpful to your computer, especially when your game gets to be pretty big. It's another way to minimize slowdowns and all that kind of stuff, especially for big games. Okay, so it came back. So that worked. Okay, so let's see what happens if we shoot the enemy with, let's say, the third bullet. Okay, so that worked too. Okay, so our bullets are working, and you have a system in which you can defeat your enemy. Now we got an actual game, sort of. And as we can see that the enemy is also following the player too. So you can take what you learned in this tutorial and expand on it. Until next time. Thanks. Bye.